Greetings, all. This is Rick Levine with your mid-month update for May of 2021. Now, just for the record, these mid-month updates are sponsored by Patreon subscribers, and so my appreciation to all of you who are in for the solar tier of Patreon. Thank you for making these monthly updates possible. As you know, they're normally distributed only to those patrons, but every now and then we make one publicly available. And so please feel free to copy this and to share it with your friends. But thank you much to all you Patreoners, because it is you who make these possible. Before I get into the mid-month update, I just want to mention that Memorial Day weekend is an annual event that I've been attending every year for 31 years, and that is the Northwest Astrological Conference, and otherwise known as NORWAC, the Northwest Astrological Conference. And it features speakers from around the world. It's a wonderful, lovely conference, and this year, as last year, it is a virtual conference, which means that it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you are able to attend it. Go to NORWAC, that's NORWAC, norwac.net. Find out more information about it and register if you are so inclined. I'll be doing 2 lectures there, one on writing horoscope columns, not only the art of writing them, but also how to market them and how to get into that market. And the second lecture that I'll be giving will be on the ongoing square between Saturn and Uranus. That is one of the themes of calendar 2021. With no further ado, we will now move into the actual forecast and discussion for the middle of May 2021. I am recording this on the morning of May 18th, and we have the moon in Leo. And but before I bring up a chart, I want to bring up 3 things which are all significant for the second part of May. Some of these I have addressed in great detail in the May forecast, but I want to bring them back into our awareness now that we're pushing into May and these events are now upon us. The first thing that I wanted to talk about is the fact that Jupiter has moved into Pisces. Now, Jupiter normally changes signs once a year because it's approximately a 12-year cycle. It actually takes 11.9 years, which means it spends just less than a year in each sign. But like all the planets, Jupiter's orbit is slightly elliptical, and the movement of Jupiter is tempered by the fact that we are on Earth and Earth is also moving. And so we get that phenomenon that we get with all the real planets, the regular planets, meaning Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and Chiron and Eris and so on, but not the sun and the moon. And I'm talking about retrogrades. Now, we actually have 3 retrogrades to talk about right now. And although Jupiter is not moving retrograde until July, we need to talk about the retrograde of Jupiter. And yet we will also be talking about the retrograde of Saturn and of Mercury. But I want to spend a little bit of time on Jupiter because Jupiter, which normally spends a year in each sign and does a retrograde most of the time in that same sign, this year is turned into a bit of an anomaly. And I think that Jupiter's movement into Pisces is incredibly significant. So, as you may recall, Jupiter moved into Aquarius back last December within a few days of Saturn moving into Aquarius. And remember, Jupiter and Saturn lined up at 0 degrees of Aquarius in their once every 20-year conjunction cycle. So we had Jupiter moving into Aquarius back on December 19th, 2020. And now on May 13th, just less than a week ago, which is basically 5 months later, Jupiter moved out of Aquarius and into Pisces. And everyone's making a big deal out of that, and we should, but it's important to understand that Jupiter will move into Pisces, which it already did on May 13th, and then it'll move out of Pisces, and then it'll move back into Pisces, and then out of Pisces again, and then back into Pisces a third time, and out of Pisces again. And this is very, very weird. And I just want to step through this very quickly because it's so weird that it is creating confusion amongst people who don't quite see the big picture. What they know is that Jupiter has moved into Pisces, where it is now, and we'll talk about what that means in just a few minutes. And then Jupiter turns retrograde. And then after being in Pisces only for a couple, maybe 2.5 months, Jupiter retrogrades back into Aquarius on July 28th. And so this is basically about 2.5 months where we get a feeling of what Jupiter is like in Pisces, but it doesn't last because it goes back into Aquarius the end of July, where it stays all the way through the end of December. So we have to understand that even though we're getting a 2.5 month hit of Jupiter in the watery world of Pisces, where our feelings, our imagination, our spirituality, these things are all expanded. They're opened up. Compassion, the idea of Jupiter, the expansive planet, going into the perhaps not just the most expansive sign, but the most dispersive sign, Pisces, because Pisces is the endless, boundless seas of consciousness of the universe itself. So we have just 2.5 months of Jupiter being in Pisces, and then it goes back into Aquarius, where it reconsiders all of these more conceptual, intellectual topics, ideas, ideals that we have already been working on. And then when it moves back into Pisces on December 28th, it stays in Pisces from December 28th all the way through May, and now that's 2022. And so we're getting another, 5 months of Jupiter in Pisces, and we get to revisit the dreams that are now opening up as Jupiter moves into Pisces. This increases our sense of vision, our sense of dreams, our sense of imagination. And so that will come back into focus the end of 2022 when Jupiter moves back into Pisces. Then Jupiter will leave Pisces and enter Aries. Actually, it does it on May 10th of 2022. And what's significant is that even though Jupiter has left Pisces a second time, entering Aries, on October 27th, this is 2022, Jupiter backs up into Pisces for the third and final time, and it just stays there for a couple of months, a little shy of a couple of months. It moves in on October 27th, and then moves out into Aries on December 20th, 2022. And it's this last 2 month period that will really give us a deeper understanding of Jupiter's visit into the dream realms of Pisces. So back to the current time, here we are on May 18th, 2022. Jupiter moved into Pisces about a week ago, and there's a shift in the zeitgeist. There's this sense of a softening, of an opening, of a dreaminess that comes to us. But there's another piece of the puzzle that's also very important, and that is that Jupiter's entry into Pisces marks the first time in over a century and a half when Jupiter and Neptune are both in Pisces. Remember, Jupiter's domicile, Jupiter's home sign is Pisces. And when a planet is in its home sign, it's even stronger. And so Jupiter moving these 3 times into, out of, into, out of, into, out of, again, into and out of Pisces 3 times, Jupiter is basically toying around with his with its home sign. Meanwhile, we have Neptune, which is the modern either ruler or planet associated with Pisces, and Neptune, I mean, and Neptune is in Pisces for 14 years. What this means is that while Jupiter is moving through Pisces, while Neptune is there, Jupiter will actually join up with Neptune not until 2022. But even still, this is the fulfillment of this image of Jupiter and Neptune both being in Pisces. The last time they were both in Pisces was 1855, 1856. And this was the time that the abolition movement was really heating up in the United States. It was pre-Civil War in the US. And it was also the time that the Republican Party was founded. It seems like there's a large cycle coming around as once again, the idealism of the idealism of Neptune and the beliefs, the philosophy of Jupiter kind of come together and give us perhaps a chance maybe this time to get it even more right than we tried to last time. So this Jupiter in Pisces is a big deal. And although other planets will make aspects to Jupiter along the way, understand that now that Jupiter is in Pisces, Jupiter's energy is more about an emotional, intuitive, belief-based concept rather than expanding those things which were more technological, more hardcore scientific, even conceptual, but conceptual with a real world application. So that's the Jupiter thing. We'll talk about that a bit more as we look at other planets that are making aspects to Jupiter. The second thing I want to talk about is the full moon eclipse on May 26th, and that's at 4:13 a.m. Pacific time. That's Pacific Daylight Time. And we'll look at this chart in a bit more detail in a few minutes. I just want to mention that this full moon eclipse is the first of 2 eclipses, because eclipses normally come in pairs, sometimes a third. And this eclipse is actually the first of a pair, the second one being on June 10th. And that June 10th eclipse is an annular eclipse, meaning it's a solar eclipse. And because the moon will be a little bit farther away from Earth than normal, the moon doesn't cover the sun completely. It leaves a ring, so it's not a total eclipse. But we'll talk more about that when we get to June's forecast. I'm just wanting to make sure that we understand that when we hit the eclipse of May 26th, the Sagittarius full moon eclipse, that this is the entry into eclipse season. We have a few weeks, 2 weeks apart, the full moon followed by the new moon, new moon in Gemini, that this is a time where we've entered into the vortex. We've entered into that realm that's associated with the lunar nodes, where there's warps in time and things are not about what's on the surface. And so it's important to understand that this eclipse on May 26th is tied to the second eclipse on June 10th. That's the second thing I wanted to talk about. The third thing I wanted to talk about is Mercury retrograde. And I mentioned earlier that we really have 3 retrogrades to talk about. We talked about the Jupiter retrograde only in as much as its retrograde cycle is so weird right now that it peaks into the new sign, backs into the new sign Pisces, backs into Aquarius, then peaks into Aquarius again, peaks into Pisces again, moves all the way through Pisces, and then just touches into Aries, and then moves back into Pisces for a third and final time. That's all because of Jupiter's retrograde cycle. The other cycle that we want to talk about with retrogrades is the fact that Saturn turns retrograde on May 23rd. We dug into this on the May forecast, and I think the important thing to understand about the Saturn retrograde is that what it really means is that the Saturn Uranus square, which has been growing farther apart, now comes back into focus, and it becomes sharper and sharper until it's exact again in mid-June, actually June 14th. The other piece, though, of that Saturn retrograde is that Saturn actually turns retrograde at 13 degrees of Aquarius. When it retrogrades and backs all the way up, it turns direct in early October, I think October 10th, it turns direct, and it turns direct at 7 degrees of Aquarius. Oh, I think it's six degrees, 50 some 53, 54 minutes, but it's just about 7 degrees. So in these months, May to June, July, August, September, even into October, this 5-month period, Saturn moves backwards, but it only moves backwards about 7 degrees. Because Saturn turns direct at 6 degrees of Aquarius, what that means is that the space between 7 degrees of Aquarius and 13 degrees of Aquarius, that is Saturn's shadow. Now, we'll talk about this a bit more when we look at Mercury's shadow, because Mercury is also turning retrograde the end of the month, actually on May 29th. But the important thing about the slower moving planets and their shadows is less what's going on during that period of time itself than it is if we have planets in our natal chart that are between, let's say, 7 degrees and 13 and a half degrees of Aquarius, or for that matter, of any of the other fixed signs, whether it's Aquarius or Taurus or Leo or Scorpio. Because what this means is knowing that Saturn is going to move through that 6-degree point, 7 degrees of Aquarius, up to about 13 and a half, back over that same period or that same space again, and then again the third and final time, means that if anyone has a planet at those points, Saturn will move across that point by conjunction or square or opposition, or for that matter, by any other aspect, 3 times. And so then the significance of the Saturn retrograde makes a whole lot more sense. And it's also important to notice, if you know your own chart and you know what house that 7 to 13 degrees of Aquarius, if you know what house that falls in your chart, that area will be under more a tighter control. It'll be more emphasized. There'll be more responsibility. There may be more work to do there, because Saturn will not just be moving through there in its regular basis, but it'll be spending an extended period of time, up to 7, 8, 9 months as it goes forward, backward, and forward again. The last thing I want to talk about here is the Mercury retrograde, because Mercury turning retrograde on May 29th is also significant, because that means that Mercury is also slowing down. It then turns retrograde. It retrogrades from May 29th all the way through June 22nd. And during that period of time with Mercury retrograde in Gemini, it's significant because Gemini is Mercury's home sign, its domicile, and therefore Mercury is even stronger. So we could expect this retrograde to even be stronger. When Mercury turns retrograde, it turns retrograde at 24 degrees of Gemini, and that's on May 29th. When it backs up, when it turns retrograde, it retrogrades all the way back to 16 degrees of Gemini. And then on June 22nd, it begins moving forward again. So that retrograde shadow again is between 16 degrees of Gemini and 24 degrees of Gemini. This means that Mercury entered its shadow. That's the area where it goes forward, backward, forward. It hits those points 3 times. Mercury entered its shadow back on May 22nd. I say back on. That's really where we are right now. But from the point of Mercury turning retrograde on the 29th, we have to understand that Mercury is getting ready now. We're on the 18th of May right here. Mercury over the next several days will move into that shadow area, and we'll begin to feel some of the stresses or tensions or benefits, which we'll get to also in a moment, of Mercury retrograding, even though it doesn't turn retrograde until the 29th. Then, once it turns direct on the 22nd at 16 degrees of Gemini, it doesn't move out of that shadow area until July 8th. And so we really have the retrograde period of Mercury from May 29th to June 22nd, but we have Mercury in that area where things are a bit tweaky, if you will, that begin on May 22nd and extend all the way through July 8th. So having done that, I'd like now to bring up our chart. We'll spin through the last week and a half or two of the month, and we will see what's in store. Okay, so here we are looking at a chart for May 18th, 2021 at noon, and this is an Aries rising chart, which means that wherever you are in the world, this chart will work for you as long as you adjust the noon to whatever time zone you are in. For example, if you're in the East Coast of the United States, these charts that are all noon charts for you will be 3 p.m. and so on. So when we look at this chart, the first thing that I notice is that the moon is at 15 degrees of Leo, and that moon is opposing Saturn. Now, before I talk about what this means specifically, I just want to point out that if we backed this chart up a few days, which I'm going to right now, back to May 12th, we will see that Jupiter here is actually at 29 degrees of Aquarius, and then Jupiter moves into Pisces later on the day on the 13th. It shows here on the 14th. This is Jupiter's ingress into Pisces. And by today, the 18th, we have that moon actually moving opposite Saturn, and we come into the first of many repetitive cycles of the moon kicking off that square between between Saturn and Uranus. Now, for those of you who have been following my work, you know that the Saturn-Uranus square was exact back in February. It's exact a second time in mid-June, and it will be exact a third and final time in late December, although it'll still linger and become close again by next October 2022. Now, the exact dates of these are significant, but what's also significant is when the planets, the faster moving planets, the moon being the fastest, when they make aspects to both of them. And here we have on May 18th, we have the moon making a square to Uranus first and then an opposition to Saturn, stirring up some of this continuing energy of the old versus the new, the old, the conservative, the status quo versus the revolutionary, the progressive, the destabilizing versus the stabilizing. And as I've said many times, it's not about one winning or one dominating the other. It's about figuring out a way in which we can have both of those energies present, because Uranus without Saturn is a breakdown of structure, and Saturn without Uranus is a structure falling under its own history, under its own dead weight. And so finding that balance is very, very significant. We do have also on the 18th, we have Mars making a square and a half with Jupiter. And this square and a half is actually an aspect of anxiety, and Mars and Jupiter is a bit of overdoing, and we may feel a little bit agitated about something or someone who is overexpressing, overdoing, moving things too far, becoming too enthusiastic about something, and maybe have the sense of needing to pull the reins in a bit. On the 19th, and that would be Wednesday, we have the moon moving into Virgo middle of the day. Here at noon, it still shows at 28, almost 29 degrees of Leo. But by 2 in the afternoon, the moon's moved into Virgo. The moon also opposes Jupiter. And now, again, we have this indulgence, this too much. In fact, what's interesting is just prior to the moon changing signs, the moon makes a square to the sun. The sun is at the last degree of Taurus, moves into Gemini on Thursday. And this is a change of astrological season, if you will, or a change of energy, because there are 3 signs in each season. And when the moon moves from, or when any planet moves from Taurus to Gemini, it moves from fixed to adaptable or changeable or mutable. And the sun, in some ways, as it moves into Gemini on Thursday, will feel a lightening of the energy for sure. But on Wednesday, while the moon is making a square to the sun while it's still in fixed sign Leo, then the moon moves into Virgo, and then it opposes Jupiter. And we're already feeling this opening, this sense of wanting to do more. But something is holding us back on the 19th. And what's holding us back is that Venus in the evening makes a trine to Saturn. We'll be feeling this all day. But that Venus trine Saturn is a bit of sobriety when it comes to having our needs met. We're just a little more cautious. We're a little more serious. We're ready to hold in our need for immediate gratification in order to find the right thing in the long term, and that Venus and Saturn can really work well together in setting up something that is lasting and important in how we express our desires, our love, our values. That would be Venus. And as I mentioned, on the 20th, we have the sun moving from Taurus to Gemini. Here at noon, you can see the sun is at 29 degrees of Taurus in 59 minutes. It actually moves into Gemini just 36 minutes after noon. And if we were to advance this chart just a half an hour or 40 minutes, we would see the sun moving from Taurus into Gemini. And this lightens the energy. It also scatters the energy. Remember, we're coming out of a period of a month of determination, of focus. The energy in Taurus, especially the sun in Taurus, has had that kind of straightforward vision of wanting to keep things on track and going forward, even though we've had Mars and Mercury and Venus all moving into Gemini, Mars now into Cancer. So we haven't just been stuck in Taurus. We're getting already some of that lighter energy, some of the movement with Mercury and Venus in Gemini. But when the sun moves into Gemini on Thursday, I think that ups the ante, and there's really this sense of restlessness. There's the sense of, why aren't we where we are already going? No, let me say this again. Why aren't we already at the destination where we are going? In other words, there's this impatience. There's this sense of that everything should be now. And I think that that's even heightened by the 21st, as the sun moves from Taurus into Gemini. That sun makes a square with Jupiter, which has recently moved from fixed sign Aquarius into mutable sign Pisces. The sun now moving from fixed sign Taurus into mutable sign Gemini. And there's this conflict between how free can we be, how scattered can we be, how interested can we be in all these different things, curious and finding new answers, new ways. And yet that Jupiter is saying, yeah, but if we're going to grow, we got to hold something steady and keep growing in this emotional state, this state of vision, this state of making the bubble that we're in larger, rather than being scattered all around like that sun in Gemini wants us to gather more information. The Jupiter in Pisces doesn't want more information. It, instead of saying, I want more information, it says, I want to increase the size of the emotional bubble within which I live. So I think that this is an important dilemma that kind of begins to come to the surface. I think we'll see more of this over the next couple of days. By the way, the moon moves into Libra on the evening, 6:35 p.m. And that also gives us a sense of that increased of airiness as the moon moves into Libra. The moon will form a trine with the sun, harmonizing the energy and increasing the airy thinking, lighthearted energy, pulling us out of the the feet on the ground. And that becomes only more so as we move on into Saturday, the 22nd, because what we have is Mercury actually makes a square with Neptune. Now, remember, Neptune, like Jupiter, is in Pisces, and Pisces is the sign that has to do with the ultimate dissolution of physical reality into the spiritual, into the metaphysical, and it's there that the magic occurs in that cosmic soup that then begins the new phase as the energies move into Aries back into spring every year. But Mercury, especially in Gemini, where it's at, along with Venus, along with the North Node, and along with the Sun, Mercury in Gemini wants information. Mercury in Gemini is looking to collect detailed, specific pieces of information and wants to somehow try to connect them, because that's what Gemini does. It wants to connect the dots. Neptune, on the other hand, doesn't want anything to do with specific. It's less interested in facts of specific pieces of data than it is in the general field of what it feels like in that space. Neptune is more dispersed, and Mercury is more exacting. So Mercury squaring Neptune can be a bit of a problem because we may have a hard time expressing ourselves, because Mercury wants to get it nailed. It wants to use the words. But with Mercury squaring Neptune, we can start to describe something that may seem really simple. And 2 or 3 sentences into it, we realize that everything needs more description. And 15 minutes later, we're still describing the same thing that maybe was simple and could have been said with a sentence or two. But it's almost like Neptune disperses, it fuzzes out the boundaries, and it makes our words turn into images. It takes a scientific how-to manual and it turns it into an art of visionary poetry or something. So it's not that it's an impossible energy, but it's difficult to harness that energy because we want to be logical and visionary at the same time. Now, during this period of time, also, Saturn is slowing down. And on the 23rd, that would be Sunday. There we go. On the 23rd, Saturn actually stations to turn retrograde. But, if you can see, Saturn here is at 13 degrees 31 minutes. And if I back this up a day or 2 or 3, Saturn is still at 13 degrees 31 minutes. And then I bring this forward to here's where Saturn technically turns retrograde, but I move it forward to, this is the 22nd. I move it forward to the 23rd, the 24th, the 25th, and Saturn is still at the same degree, same minute. Now, the point in this is that when we say that the outer planets, or for that matter, any planet turns retrograde, it's a technical moment in time, but the planet, because like a pendulum, has to slow down to change directions and then gain speed and then slows down to change directions again. It actually has to come to a stop, in effect. And of course, the planets don't stop. It's all a wonderful optical illusion based upon the movement of the Earth. But the point here is that Saturn, through this whole week, from the 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, Saturn is barely moving at all. It's moving seconds of arc rather than even minutes of arc. And remember, a minute of arc is 1/60th a degree, just like a minute is 1/60th of an hour. That Saturn has barely moved 1 minute in 5-6 days. So when a planet moves slowly or is not moving at all, or appears to be not moving at all, it gains power. And so we have that Saturn right now holding an extraordinary high level of power through this entire week, kind of being a weight, being a counterpoint to that Uranus progressive, radical, moving forward, the exciting, the breaking free, and yet Saturn is like an anchor in the ground through this entire week. By the time we get to, oh, by the way, the moon moves into Scorpio at 8 p.m. on the 23rd. Back that up a little bit. So on the 23rd, there's the moon in Libra. By the 24th, it's already at 10 degrees of Scorpio at noon. And this is, of course, we now have Saturn, although it won't show here. It is technically moving retrograde. By the 25th, on Tuesday, we have the sun making a half square with Mars. Now, again, these squares and half squares are they're like squares and oppositions. They create tension, they create stress that needs to be resolved. It's said that half squares are not as strong as squares. I'm not sure that's always the case. The fact of the matter is that when we have two planets that are a half a square, that's 45 degrees, and that's the sun to Mars, there is agitation because, again, here the sun in Gemini wants movement and Mars in Cancer wants stillness. Mars in Cancer is a bit afraid of moving too much, too hard, too forward, too fast. And so Mars holds its position. And in fact, Mars is coming into a trine to Neptune that's not exact until the end of the month, until May 30th. But you can see here already that Mars is, there's a blue line between Mars and Neptune. So Mars is already picking up on that trine. But there's that half square between the sun and Mars that's quite agitating, and we may not know where to go with this excess energy or even with the anger that we're feeling around on the 25th. The other thing that occurs on the 25th is that the moon moves into Sagittarius at about 7:40. I think it's 7:39 p.m. again, Pacific time. And the moon, once it moves into Sagittarius, will pick up on a square to Jupiter. And again, we have this feeling of excess, of too much. And of course, the moon in Sagittarius all by itself can be too much. It's ready to go. It's ready to travel. It's ready to do something. And that square to Jupiter may even exacerbate it more and may push that even a little bit further. Now, note that the moon, as it moves into Sagittarius, that the moon then forms a full moon early in the morning on May 26th. Here I am putting in the exact time. So we have the full moon at 4:13 a.m. on Wednesday in the morning, on Wednesday, the 26th. And the reason why I'm zoning in on this is not just because that this is a full moon, it is, but it is also a lunar eclipse. And you can tell by looking at a chart often that when there is a full moon or a new moon that is very close to the lunar nodes, to the north or south node of the moon, this full moon is just 5 degrees away from a conjunction to the south node of the moon at 10 degrees of Sagittarius. When a full moon or new moon is close to the nodes, this is when an eclipse occurs. And so we have this eclipse in Sagittarius. And as I said earlier, this is the first of 2 eclipses. The second one is the Gemini annular solar eclipse on June 10th. But this eclipse is significant because it picks up on that square to Jupiter. Even though it's technically after the square, it's just, I mean, it's like just a few hours prior to this eclipse, the moon is squaring Jupiter. And remember, the sun squared Jupiter just a couple of days ago. That sun squared Jupiter was on the 21st, more like 5 days ago. But we still have this whole issue of information that is being overextended, overexpanded, made too much of. Why information? Because Gemini and Sagittarius are an information axis. Gemini is the high frequency noise data information that comes in and out and in and out. And Sagittarius is the information that is the overarching broader concepts that kind of that create the environment within which the noise occurs. And this is right now with Jupiter making that square, it's increasing the load on that. And so we may find ourselves by the end of May back in some place where the information wars have once again reached some sort of apparent breaking point, or things are out of hand. And in fact, the other piece here that is important is we still have that Mercury squaring Venus, and Mercury squaring Neptune. And because Mercury and Venus are kind of close together, we also have Venus coming into the square to Neptune, which is exact the day after the eclipse, midday on Thursday, the 27th. So this Mercury and Venus in Gemini, these are flirtatious, frivolous, these are lighthearted, these are curious. Mercury in Gemini, it's curious. It's Alice in Wonderland, the line curiouser and curiouser. And Venus in Gemini means we like that. We like the idea of having our attention in many different directions and being titillated by all the facts and figures and whatever. But we have that moon in Sagittarius that's still, remember, that is the eclipse point that is kind of wanting to turn this into some sort of larger concept. And here's the problem. The problem is not just that the eclipse is squared to Jupiter, it's that we have the Mercury and Venus are on either side, the Mercury already having occurred and the Venus not having occurred yet, square to Neptune, is once again off in Pisces land, Neptune in Pisces, Jupiter in Pisces. It's once again kind of bringing up all this, the dissolution of the boundary between fact and fiction. It's hard to, there's a saying, it's as difficult as nailing jelly to a tree. In other words, it's hard to grasp onto something that is jelly-like, that there's no solidness to it. And this Mercury and Venus squaring to Jupiter makes it really difficult to know how to work with this energy or what to do with it. And in fact, that Mercury and Venus come closer and closer together because Mercury, which normally moves faster than Venus, is already slowing down because it's going to turn retrograde on the 29th. And so what we have here is that on the 27th, we have Venus squaring Neptune. Remember, Mercury already squared Neptune. And this again is almost being in love with the idea of being confused. This is like there's something attractive that would be Venus about the idea of images, and this is romanticism. This is building something by virtue of one's imagination rather than by reality. But we have a bit of a reality check also on Thursday the 27th, and that is that the moon moves into Capricorn at 7:23 p.m. And of course, as the moon moves into Capricorn, it seems like as most planets change signs, they make an aspect with Jupiter, which has just changed signs. And that moon, which moves from the moon, which moves into Capricorn at 7:23 p.m., just a few hours later makes a sextile with Jupiter, again opening things up, expanding things. Even though the moon in Capricorn is sobering, is serious, is calculating, is reality oriented, it still wants to open things up as it moves closer to that sextile on Thursday evening, 9:30 Pacific time, and that's actually 12:30 a.m. on Friday morning on the East Coast. But by Friday the 28th, we can see that Mercury and Venus are moving closer and closer together. This really won't show here until the next day. Let's see, we're still on the 27th, the 28th, and here we are on the 29th, and you can see that Mercury and Venus have swapped places. Let's go back to the 28th, and we can see that Mercury at 24 degrees, Venus at 23, and Mercury is moving very slowly because it's stationing tomorrow, the 29th. And so Venus, normally moving slower than Mercury, now moves faster than it catches up. Mercury is pretty much as at the same place because Mercury stations retrograde on the 29th. And we went through those dates earlier. Remember, it doesn't turn direct until June 22nd. It retrogrades all the way back to 16 Aries. And incidentally, the amount that it retrogrades backwards, not very many degrees. It's retrograding back to 16 degrees. That's like 8 degrees. Often in a Mercury retrograde, it'll cover 12, 13, 14 degrees. And so it's interesting that this retrograde lasts longer but covers less ground than normal. And deceased astrologer Robert Blaschke, brilliant astrologer, passed away a number of years ago, noted that when Mercury retrogrades over a longer period of time, it covers less degrees, and he claimed that these were the more difficult ones. And again, because Mercury is in its home sign, Gemini, we will see. But remember, there's nothing wrong with the Mercury retrograde. It's simply the cosmos' way of telling us that we need to focus on what we didn't do, take care of business, get things done, and not just feel like we're under the pressure to make every decision be right now in the present moment, that we have to let that process occur. Because remember, any aspects that Mercury makes now as it's moving retrograde, it will make again when it moves direct, and that's because it will be moving that third and final time across its shadow. The other thing is that Mercury turns retrograde on Saturday, the 29th. The computer tells us that it occurs at 3:33 p.m. I say that's crap because depending upon where you are on the Earth, that time can vary because times are actually measured from the center of the Earth. And also because that Mercury is not moving for hours before or afterward. But for those of you who want an exact time, there it is. The other thing that occurs on Saturday, the 29th, is that the moon moves into Aquarius at 9:04 p.m. And this again is the futuristic. This frees things up a little bit. We kind of wake up on Sunday morning to a Venus quincunx Pluto that we probably already felt as Mercury was coming to its stop and beginning to make its retrograde turn on Saturday. But early on Sunday morning, Venus quincunxing Pluto is an irritating sense of kind of that love of that Gemini energy, the comfort that we have in moving around in Gemini. Remember, Venus and Mercury are still very close together. Mercury never reached the quincunx to Pluto, but Venus actually reaches it. And there's something about all this that says, yes, we can be lighthearted. Yes, we can um, bounce around in the air currents like a kite in the spring breeze. But Pluto wants more. Pluto wants depth. Pluto wants power. And the moon is actually moving through Capricorn, and that moon aligns with Pluto in the afternoon on Saturday. And so there is a bit of depth to all of this. It's not just light and easy breezy with the Sun, North Node, Mercury, and Venus in Gemini. The other thing that happens when we move to the 30th is we get the exact Mars trine Neptune that we alluded to earlier. Mars trine Neptune is a bit of a shape-shifting energy. It's what you see is not what you get. There's an easy grace and flow and dance between the emotional expression of Mars in Cancer to that Neptune in Pisces. It's interesting because if there's something that we really need to be angry about, if there's something that anger has a function, and part of the function of the anger that we get from Mars is the need to define or to solidify a boundary. And with Mars in Cancer trining Neptune, it's almost impossible to create that boundary. Things slide through, things that are normally boundaries become transparent or even just translucent. And there's a bit of a flow. Now, we can use that to our advantage by understanding the grace and the flow, and that things don't necessarily have to be so black and white. Mars trine Neptune is neither black nor white. It's a lot of shades of gray in between. But I think that it allows us to find a place of compassion that normally we may just kind of gloss over. On the 31st, we have Venus forming a square and a half with Uranus. This is a bit more electric. We're coming out of a fuzzy day. And on the 30th, also, we have the sun lining up with the nodes. Just often a day where we feel in touch with a deeper sense of our own past. And when I say our own past, I don't mean just, the last year, the last decade, our early childhood, but even our genetic lineage, our family of origin stuff. There's just a connection that things seem to be deeper entrenched, more deeply entrenched than we normally think they are. And the sun moving over that north node certainly can bring some awareness. But at the same time, that Venus half square to Uranus is a bit of excitement. Again, we talked about the restlessness of Gemini. Here we're getting that restlessness on steroids. It's like we got to do something. Things are definitely kind of irritating, and yet we like the idea of shaking things up. We like the idea of turning things inside out. We actually could easily do something that would be risky or break a rule. I'm not encouraging that. I'm just saying that Venus semi-square Uranus is attracted to that in that direction. By the way, that the moon in Aquarius shifts into Pisces early in the morning on June 1st. And then on June 2nd, Venus, which has been moving through Gemini, moves into Cancer. And there's a whole shift of energy at the beginning of June with Venus moving into Cancer on June 2nd, followed by the moon moving into Aries. It starts the clock all over again, and we will get to June when we do the June forecast in about a week. So that's pretty much it. It's a bit of a rock and roll ride. There's a sense that these last couple of weeks of June are really moving us through some spaces. And I think that the combination of settling into the Jupiter in Pisces, which is where we started the talk today, the combination of that, the retrograde of Saturn and retrograde of Mercury, and the stepping into eclipse season are all basically stirring up the energy that is not necessarily about all moving forward. Because now with Saturn slowing down to retrograde, with Mercury turning retrograde, even though Jupiter is giving us this kind of like a glimpse, a sense, a quick view, a just a figment of a flip chart kind of going through our mind, going, that's the way, what happened? Where did it go? And of course, that glimpse is not just a momentary second. It's going to be a good couple of months. But even still, that doesn't hold. And at this point in time, toward the end of June or toward the end of May, as we move toward June, we're getting the sense that we've been moving forward at breakneck speeds. And now we kind of settle back into some rhythms so that we can get things right. We can build the foundations. We can use that Mercury retrograde to take care of those things that have gotten away from us before we begin to then push forward as we move further on into June, July, and August. That's it for now. Again, thank you to all you Patreons who support this work. If you're interested in joining the Patreon group, you can do so at patreon.com/Rick Levine. And there's explanations of what the different levels of affiliation are. And with that, I wish you all well. And remember, as always, think cosmically, but act locally. If you don't put things into use locally, there's no reason at all to use the mind to extend out cosmically. Everything has to be local, is where the rubber hits the road. Local is where things happen. So think cosmically, but act locally. I'm Rick Levine.